Let's understand what is a cookie and how it works in this video. Cookie is just a key value pair that the server asks browser to store. So it asks the browser to store this information by sending the response header called setCookie. The syntax for setting cookie in the response header is the header name, which is setCookie, and then followed by the value. So the value includes key value pair and then set of attributes. So these attributes controls when this cookie is sent back to the server. So if there are multiple key value pairs that the server wants browser to store, then it must repeat the set cookie header for each of the key value pair that it wants the browser to store. Okay, now the server asks the browser to store the cookie, but what is the use? Why it wants to save that information on the browser? The idea is once that information is saved on the browser will send the data back to the server each time a request is made to the same server. So there are some rules which governs when that cookie will be sent back to the server. But the general idea is once the server asks the browser to store that information, browser will be able to send that back to the server. So storing this kind of information in the browser is very useful for various reasons. For example, it can track what has happened on the browser, or it can even maintain some sort of session state between the server and browser communication. So there are various use cases like this for storing cookie on the browser. Now let's take a little bit detailed look at how this works. So we have our browser and we also have our web server. Now the browser sends the very first request to our server. If this is a very first request, if the browser has never visited that particular server before or the website before, then there won't be any cookie stored on the browser. So now we send the request and the server will respond to that request. So when it responds, it may optionally ask the browser to store some cookie information. So that will be included in the response header, and the header name for that is setCookie that we have seen previously here. So if there are any setCookie header, then the browser will honor that and that information will be stored within the browser. Typically it will not be stored directly within the browser. That information will be stored in a secure cookie store, but it will be accessible for the browser. Now if the browser needs to make any future request to the same server or same website, then the cookie will be automatically included in all of those future requests. Okay, the cookie information will be included as long as the attributes of the cookie doesn't restrict them from being sent to the server. So these attributes that we have seen previously controls when to include the cookie in the request and when not to include them in the request. So these attributes controls them. So as long as we don't have any restrictive attribute which prevents this particular cookie being sent from the browser to the server, the cookie will be included in the request. So then the server will be able to use that information to do whatever it needs to do. Now let's look at some of these attributes in detail. Like we have seen previously, these attributes control when to send the cookie to the server. This is more like scoping. So these attribute creates the scope for that particular cookie. The browser knows when to include that cookie and when not to include that cookie when the request is made to the website or web server. So there are some common attributes and let's take a look at them now. The first one is domain. Domain indicates the allowed domain for this cookie. As long as the request domain matches the allowed domain, the cookie will be included. Okay. So let's take a look at this in detail with some examples. If the domain is set to image.amazon.com, for example, then when the request domain is image.amazon.com, then the cookie will be included. Whereas if the request domain is www.amazon.com, then cookie will not be included because the domains are different now, right? So the allowed domain is just image.amazon.com. But now we have www.amazon.com, which is a different domain. So the cookie will not be included in this case. Let's take another example. In this case, the domain is set to .amazon.com. So this is more like a wildcard domain. Basically, any subdomain of amazon.com or a valid domain now. So if the request domain is image.amazon.com, then that is a valid domain because we support all the subdomains of amazon.com. and image.amazon.com is the subdomain of amazon.com. So this is a valid domain and the cookie will be included. And similarly for www.amazon.com as well, the cookie will be included because this is again a subdomain of amazon.com. Another attribute is path. This indicates the allowed path for the cookie. Again, let's take a detailed look at this with an example. So if the path is set to /login, then whenever a request is made to /login path, the cookie will be included. But if the request is made to any other path, for example logout in this case, then the cookie will not be included. Okay. Now let's take another example. In this case, path is set to just a /. So this is again more like a wildcard path, i.e. the cookie will be included for all the paths. Okay. So if the path is login, then the cookie will be included. And if it is any other path, for example, if it is a logout, then in that case also the cookie will be included. The next common attribute is something called expires. This indicates how long the cookie is valid. Okay. So this one uses the fixed date. So we can specify a fixed date and time, and until that date and time, the cookie is valid. And the example for this will be something like this. We'll specify the actual date and time until which the cookie is valid. Okay. Another attribute which is more common and alternative to expires is max age. With max age, we'll be able to specify the time span until which this particular cookie is valid. So we will usually specify this time span in seconds. And this is more modern approach than the expires attribute. Let's take a look at the example for this one. So here we set the max age to 120. It means that particular cookie is valid for 120 seconds. Okay. After that the cookie expires and it will not be included when any request is made to the server. The next common attribute is something called secure, and this attribute indicates that the cookie should only be included if the request is HTTPS request. If it is a normal HTTP request, then it will not be included, and the cookie will only be included if it is HTTPS request. Okay. So the next one is something called same site, and this attribute controls when the cookie will be sent to the server in the cross-domain context. Okay. So this is actually a little bit more involved, and I'll explain this in detail in the next video. But for now, this particular attribute controls when the cookie will be sent in the cross-domain context. So that is all we need to know for this one. One of the important thing that we need to remember is each of these attribute adds additional layer of restriction. Okay, so all of these are working in conjunction. So all of these condition has to be met, or all of these attribute restriction has to be satisfied in order for the cookie to be sent to the server. Okay. So now let's take an example of a complete set cookie response header and we'll understand how it works. So here we have this set cookie response header. Here banner equal to true is the actual key value pair. This is the actual value that is being stored. And the domain in this case is .codebot.com, which means the cookie will be sent back to the server whenever a request is made to any subdomain of this codebot.com domain. And the path is just a /, which means the cookie will be included in all the requests. And also we are saying that this cookie has to be included only when the request is a HTTPS request, i.e. the request has to be a secure request. And finally, we have max age attribute, and this attribute says that this particular cookie is valid for 3600 seconds. Okay, this is sort of like a realistic set cookie header response. Okay, so that is all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.